Happy Friday to you all and welcome to the program. It is 15th of June, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Shin Se-min, and these are the stories following at the top of the hour. The two Koreas say they are completely restoring their military communication lines along the western and the eastern border areas after their first general-level military talks in more than a decade. There are still risks that could derail efforts to bring peace to the Korean peninsula, says Washington's top diplomat who has been touring Asia to brief regional leaders. Mike Pompeo says sanctions on North Korea will remain in place for now. Plus, Russia starts the 2018 World Cup in style with a smashing win against Saudi Arabia in the tournament's first game. It's the biggest opening game win since the mid-1930s. But first, we begin this morning with the first general-level military talks between the two Koreas in over 10 years. The two sides discussed ways to ease cross-border tensions and released a joint statement outlining how they plan to do it. Our Park Ji-won starts us off.
After nearly 12 hours of talks on the North Korean side of Panmunjom, the two Koreas released a statement late Thursday. It said they had agreed to completely restore military communication lines between the two Koreas, both on the eastern and western part of the peninsula. It also said the two sides fully shared ideas on issues, including creating a peace zone around the Northern Lemon Line, a de facto maritime border in the West Sea, and demilitarizing the joint security area in the DMZ as a pilot program. The two sides also agreed to implement an inter-Korean military agreement reached in 2004, in which they agreed to prevent accidental naval clashes in the West Sea and to cease propaganda activities around border areas. The two delegations were led respectively by South Korean Major General Kim Do-gyun and North Korean Lieutenant General An Ik-san. A lieutenant general in North Korea is equivalent to a major general in South Korea.
The complete restoration of military communication lines and the reaffirmation of the 2004 Inter-Korean Military Agreement are significant steps. As our two leaders have opened the path to peace, South and North Korea should not repeat past practices if we want to achieve peace.
We had our differences during the talks. However, both our militaries have a firm willingness to implement the Panmunjom Declaration, drawing up military measures to end all hostile acts, and designating a peace zone will be resolved soon.
The two sides also agreed to continue inter-Korean consultations on military-related issues that were brought up during Thursday's talks. Also, in an unusually speedy manner, North Korea's state media reported on the talks and the joint statement on Thursday evening, just a matter of hours after the discussions had ended. The two Koreas are slated to hold another general-level or working-level military talks in June or July to coordinate both sides' positions before holding ministerial-level talks. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
And following that inter-Korean military talks, the defense chiefs of South Korea and the U.S. held phone conversations on their military cooperation on Thursday evening at local time. And during their 30-minute phone conversation, Seoul's defense minister Song Young-moo congratulated his U.S. counterpart James Mattis on the latest and successful North Korea-U.S. summit. Song stressed President Moon's stance that a flexible change regarding military pressure on the North is necessary as long as faithful talks are ongoing. And both sides agreed to continue close consultations to implement the agreement at the North Korea-U.S. summit, including detailed discussions on joint military exercises, particularly the upcoming Ulji Freedom Guardian in August. And meanwhile, AFP reported Thursday, quoting an unnamed senior U.S. official, that U.S. joint military drills with South Korea will be suspended indefinitely. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, during his post-summit talks with regional powers, have been warning that there are still risks that could derail efforts to completely denuclearize the Korean peninsula. He also added sanctions will stay in place until the regime's nuclear program is completely dismantled. Our Park Hee-jun with the details.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi have reaffirmed that economic sanctions on North Korea will remain in place until the regime's complete denuclearization. At a joint press conference following their bilateral meeting on Thursday, Pompeo and Wang sounded optimistic about the recent developments on the Korean peninsula, but they agreed the scaling down of sanctions can only be on the table when North Korea has completely, verifiably, and irreversibly abandoned its nuclear weapons program.
China has reaffirmed its commitment to honoring the UN Security Council resolutions. We have made very clear that the sanctions and the economic relief that North Korea will receive will only happen after the full denuclearization, the complete denuclearization of North Korea.
Pompeo also thanked China for its role in making the Kim-Trump summit happen, but said more needs to be done by both countries to achieve the ultimate outcome. Wang, who said the summit held in Singapore held great historic significance, also said it was a path to a new start. Before heading back to Washington, Pompeo held a separate meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. The Chinese leader told Pompeo that he hopes the two countries can continue their efforts for a political resolution to the North Korea issue, and added that Beijing will keep playing an active and constructive role to promote the process. Park Ki-jun, Arirang News.
And President Trump's nominee for ambassador to South Korea has backed President Trump's idea of a pause in major military exercises between South Korean and U.S. forces. Harry Harris, himself a decorated military man, said it was an option worth exploring while talks continue on ending North Korea's nuclear program. Our Lee Seung-jae with more.
Shortly after his historic summit in Singapore with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, U.S. President Donald Trump announced he might halt the joint military exercises between South Korea and the U.S., a move long sought by the North. Siding with Trump on the issue is the president's latest nominee for ambassador to South Korea, Admiral Harry Harris. In a Senate hearing on Thursday, Harris, who recently stepped down as the head of the U.S. Pacific Command, agreed with the idea of a pause.
The whole landscape has shifted, and I believe that we should give major exercises, a pause to see if Kim Jong-un, in fact, is serious about his part of the negotiations.
Harris also said he believes sanctions on North Korea should stay in place while denuclearization talks continue, echoing earlier remarks by U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in Seoul, who said tough sanctions would remain until Pyongyang has verifiably abandoned its nuclear weapons program. The U.S. ambassador post in Seoul has been vacant since Trump took office in January 2017, and as talks continue between South and North Korea and between the U.S. and North Korea, the post is seen as more important than ever. As the nominee to become President Trump's first ambassador to South Korea, Harris said he feels optimistic about the future of the Korean Peninsula.
I've said before that we can be hopeful, we can even be optimistic as long as we are realistic also, and I'm convinced that the administration has that realism at heart as we move forward in this new place that we're in.
Born to a Japanese mother and an American father, Harris became the first Asian American to lead the U.S. Navy. His father, a Korean War veteran, helped train South Koreans in the southern coastal city of Jinhae. With his decorated military background and his connections to Korea and the wider Asian region, Harris has a strong chance of becoming the next U.S. ambassador to South Korea. The hope is that his expertise could further smooth the path to peace on the Korean Peninsula. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
And South Korean President Moon Jae-in says Seoul could consider suspending joint military exercises with the U.S. if inter-Korean and North Korea-U.S. talks continue to progress in a satisfactory manner. Now, his comments coming just 2 days after the U.S. President Donald Trump danced around the idea of halting the war games in the region. Or Cha Sang-mi reports.
Should North Korea carry out genuine measures towards denuclearization and continue to engage in faithful talks with South Korea and the U.S., South Korean President Moon Jae-in is willing to carefully review the South Korea-U.S. joint military exercises. That's according to a statement released by the president's spokesperson following a meeting of the National Security Council chaired by President Moon himself on Thursday. Based on the trust-building principles agreed upon by the leaders of the two Koreas stated in the Panmunjom Declaration, South Korea's commander-in-chief said there needs to be flexible changes to ease military pressure against North Korea. This comes on the heels of the U.S. President Trump's comment on the suspension of the joint military drills earlier this week and after U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's visit to the Blue House to meet President Moon Thursday morning. At the NSC meeting, the first to be chaired by the president this year, the South Korean president heralded the leaders of North Korea and the United States on their decision to establish a new era of Pyongyang-Washington ties.
무엇보다 새로운 북미 관계 수립을 통해 양국 간 지속되어 왔던 군사적 긴장과 적대 관계를 청산하고 새로운 미래 관계를 열어나가는 것이 북한의 완전한 비핵화와 한반도의 평화를 가져오는 유일한 길임을 함께 인식하였다는 점이 중요합니다. 이로써 남북이 판문점 선언에서 약속했던 완전한 비핵화와 한반도 평화 번영의 목표에 대해 남북미 모두 확실한 공감대 위에 서게 되었습니다.
President Moon called on his foreign and security officials to lay out details of the denuclearization roadmap so that the process can be carried out accordingly.
정전 체제의 틀을 벗어나 남북의 균형적 발전을 도모하고 한반도, 나아가서는 동북아 공동 번영을 이룩하기 위한 희망의 발걸음을 내디뎌야 할 것입니다.
Referring to the resumption of inter-Korean cooperation and exchanges, President Moon called for bold and innovative ways to connect not only the two Koreas, but to connect the South through the North into Central Asia all the way to Europe. 차상미, Arirang News.
And Russian President Vladimir Putin has praised this week's summit between North Korea and the U.S. in Singapore. Hosting North Korea's ceremonial head of state Kim Young-nam in Moscow on Thursday, President Putin said the Singapore meeting was, quote, without doubt just the first step towards a full-blown settlement and that it helped push back the threat of conflict. The Russian leader also said he welcomes the contact between the leaders of the two Koreas and added that it was always Russia's goal to resolve the issues surrounding the Korean Peninsula. Putin also invited North Korean leader Kim Jong-un to Russia come this September. Another disappointing jobs figure. Statistics Korea says only 27 million people were employed in Korea last month, up a mere 72,000 from the same period last year. Now, the dip in overall employment is mainly attributed to the country's manufacturing, retail, and educational service sectors. And in terms of the unemployment rate, that figure rose slightly in May to reach 4%, up 0.4% on year. And the story is even worse for young Koreans, as the youth unemployment rate hit 10.5%, the highest rate since the institute began recording that figure in 1999. In other news, the auction for fifth-generation network frequencies has begun in South Korea early this morning. The nation's three mobile carriers, SK Telecom, KT, and LG U+ submitted their applications on Monday to participate in the first auction for the 5G spectrum. The 3.5 gigahertz and 28 gigahertz wavelengths will be up for grabs at the event, and the auction of the 5G telecommunications airwaves reflects Korea's goal of becoming the first country in the world to commercialize the next-generation mobile network, expected to be some 20 times faster than the current 4G network. The South Korean government has held its first meeting with the American activist hedge fund Elliott Management, which is claiming $640 million in damages from Seoul. Elliott accuses the government of meddling in the 2015 merger of Samsung C&T and Jae-in Industries. The first meeting was held via video conference, as both sides were unable to even agree on a location for their talks. The hedge fund, which held a roughly 7% stake in Samsung C&T, filed an investor-state dispute against the South Korean government for the losses it said it suffered. It alleges that government officials, including the now jailed former President Park Geun-hye, unlawfully intervened in the merger. The 35-day journey, that is the 2018 World Cup, kicked off in Russia on Thursday evening local time with a sensational and unexpected start by the host nation. And our Won Jung-hwan reports from Moscow.
The wait is finally over. The 2018 Russia World Cup started the best way possible for the host nation, with them smashing 5 goals past Saudi Arabia on Thursday evening in front of a jam-packed and ecstatic Luzhniki Stadium. Prior to the sporting action on the pitch, there was the customary opening ceremony, but Russia mixed it up this year. Breaking from tradition, the opening ceremony focused on musical acts and even took place much closer to kickoff, just half an hour before the start of the match. The opening game for this year's World Cup featured the two sides ranked the lowest in the entire competition. Surprisingly, World Cup host nations have never lost their opening match, and Russia never looked like losing that record against Saudi Arabia. In fact, Russia's 5-0 win was the biggest opening match victory by a host nation since 1934. The performance thrilled the Russian fans.
We are very exciting and we are happy. We are
very good, very good.
Yes, yes.
Cherchesov, Usi, very beautiful play.
The next game we will be here.
I feel crazy. Our team scored 5 goals. It wasn't too many times that I think that it's crazy. It's a historical time. It's historical time.
I'm happy with the world. People, my friends, happy. 5-0-5, yeah!
And the best thing for the home fans is that Thursday's convincing win has given them a great chance to qualify from the group stage, especially if they can put in a similar performance in their next 2 group games. As the first game has finally kicked off, through July 15 there will be 63 matches across Russia to decide the winner of the 2018 World Cup. Won Jung-hwan, Arirang News, Moscow.
U.S. President Donald Trump has made his final decision to impose tariffs worth $50 billion on Chinese goods. President Trump made that decision during a meeting with his top trade officials at the White House on Thursday local time. And the Trump administration is expected to unveil its tariff list on Friday. And it reportedly contains 800 product categories with newly added categories targeting the technology sector. The move is likely to worsen the U.S.'s deteriorating relations with its trade partners, and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said China is ready to respond if President Trump goes ahead with the tariffs. And now for a look at stories making headlines around the world. The European Central Bank says it'll end a massive stimulus program aimed at revitalizing the Eurozone economy by the end of the year. For more on this and other news around the world, we turn to our Do Aram at the News Center. So, Aram, what does that all mean?
Well, Simon, the ECB said Thursday it will be ending its massive 3-year bond buying program by December. This will be done by winding down its bond purchases from the current 30 billion euros a month to 15 billion after September, and then eventually ending at the end of the year. ECB President Mario Draghi said the quantitative easing program was being phased out because it had succeeded in its aim of putting inflation on course to meet the bank's target of just below 2%. The Asset Purchase Programme, or APP, was put in place in early 2015 to help the Eurozone recover from its debt crisis earlier in the decade. Thursday's announcement came despite a recent slowdown in the bloc's recovery, which Draghi acknowledged, but he said underlying growth remains strong. The ECB also addressed the doves on the board by deciding not to raise its record low interest rates until next summer at the earliest. The bank said it was to ensure inflation remains in line with expectations. The euro plunged after, over 1% against the US dollar following that news. The IMF has warned that the Trump administration's new import tariffs threaten to undermine the global trading system and will also likely hurt the US economy. The comments were made by IMF Managing Director Christine Lagarde on Thursday.
As I've said before, a so-called trade war driven by reciprocal increases in import tariff gives no winner. and we find generally losers on both sides. The negative impact on the global economy would be serious, not only if the United States takes action, but especially if other countries, as a result, were to retaliate, notably those that would be most affected, such as Canada, such as Germany, and other European countries.
She also said America's recent tax cuts may help its economy in the short run, but pose greater risks down the line. The U.S. Treasury Department hit back, saying its policies will result in more sustainable economic growth. An American citizen has been arrested in Vietnam after he took part in violent protests in Ho Chi Minh City over the weekend. Will Nguyen was detained on Sunday after he joined protesters denouncing the government's plan to allow foreign companies long-term leases in Vietnam's special economic zones, a move that critics fear would favor Chinese investors. Nguyen, who is of Vietnamese descent, was among more than 100 demonstrators detained and was said to have been violently beaten by police. His family said he was charged with causing a scene and destroying public property and that a Vietnamese acquaintance paid his fines. However, his current location is unknown and his friends and family say they cannot reach him.
Good morning. Those of us in the West will have warmer weather conditions than yesterday. Western regions, including Seoul, will see highs rising to nearly 30 degrees Celsius this afternoon, while regions in the east will stay cool thanks to easterly winds. And for a closer look, Daegu and Gyeongju will have cooler highs at 23 and 21 degrees, while Seoul and Gwangju will make it to 29 degrees Celsius. With that in mind, let's take a look at the international weather for viewers around the world. So summer temperatures return to western parts of South Korea today, while North Korea will have rain all day along with cooler temperatures. Over in New Delhi, construction work is prohibited until Sunday as air quality remains severe in India's capital city. In New Zealand, there's settled weather conditions for the east coast, but rain for most western areas. Over in Washington, D.C., sunny skies will dominate the day with light winds and low humidity, so enjoy your Friday weather. And as for South America, Brazil's two major cities will have a wet Friday and weekend. Taking you to Europe, there's good news for soccer players and fans. Moscow will enjoy pleasant weather conditions for the time being, but beware of big gaps between the highs and lows. Lastly, to Africa, Cairo will be hot under sunny skies at a high of 41 degrees Celsius. And that's the weather update for now.
And that'll do it for us at the hour on Arirang News. Our next news lineup coming up at noon Korea time. Thank you for watching and goodbye for now.
Literally speaking.